So when it comes to moving beyond the classroom, and what that means is figuring out how to get the students in the classroom that are obviously that's what they have to be, but how do you get that learning to expand beyond the classroom? How do you get them connected to not just each other within the four walls of the classroom, but how do you connect them to the world that's happening outside the classroom? Because that's something that we're seeing a lot in high schools is that students feel a little bit disengaged. They don't feel as interested in the materials. We're seeing a lot of uh, administrators, a lot of teachers, a lot of high school teachers say that they're having the same types of issues where students aren't as engaged in the materials, that they're not responding as well to the lecture style, that they're not really sure what they're looking for. And so we're going to go ahead and dive into what that means, what the implications of that are, and then an approach to finding a solution to that in a kind of more unique and innovative approach. So, as I mentioned, here's a few things that are going to be talked about. Reimagining student agency. So, agency is one of the biggest things that when it comes to disenfranchisement of students within their schools, the disconnection. We're going to talk about that, the physical and community stability, what that means in a larger scale beyond just the class itself that they're taking. Long-term community trust. So, the connection between students and the community themselves and how that builds not just as students are in school, but also after school as well, and then preparing for careers in need. These are going to be some of the bigger points, but we're going to kind of go through in a larger process for what this looks like for us. So, speaking honestly, the reality that a lot of people are seeing when they say the engagement gap, that students in high school aren't engaging as much as they used to, that they're not feeling like participating, that they're not responding when teachers ask them questions. They don't go through and answer as eagerly. The participation rates in general are lower. It doesn't mean that students are necessarily not, signing up for extracurriculars, that they're not taking classes, that they're not going through high school and going to college after that. That's not necessarily what people talk about, obviously, when they mean engagement. It's sometimes showing up for school, but sometimes it's even within the classroom. They might be present, but mentally, they're not that present. And so, some people have said that this isn't an issue for, I would say it's more of a student issue or what's wrong with them or why are they having this issue. When it comes down to it, it's not just a motivation problem. It's not why don't they want to do this? Why don't students feel like this is important? Why don't they connect? And why aren't they feeling like this is something that they should be following through on? It's a little bit bigger than that. And it connects to the general way that our world has been structured at this point, and how it's kind of evolving in the future, and the way that the students see themselves in that future. So, in high school, especially at this point in a student's life, it's not just enough to be going to school because they get to see people that they know. And especially after COVID, after everything that's happened, there's a lot of pressure on social interaction. There's a lot of pressure on the grades that they need to get. Students at this point need to have more extracurriculars, higher grades, better everything than they've ever had to in the past. They need to learn more and be absorbing more things. And it's just burning a lot of students out because it's not about them. It's not about what they want. It's not about their connection or, their agency, their ownership over their lives. It's just doing as many things that they can to kind of check a list of what can get them to what they've been told that they should be at. So there's a major disconnection here between the students, the schools, and real world relevance. And what that means, it's not just, again, that they're in school and then there's out of school stuff. The students don't see where they fit into the world. And that's an issue that's beyond just the fact that they're young and they don't understand it yet. There's not a path that they're seeing for themselves as they go through their high school career, as they go into college, as they go into their careers. They don't see where they're going to fit in. They're being told that entry-level jobs are being eliminated at record rates. They're being told that sectors are changing, that the economy is different, that the world is looking different than it ever has, and they can't figure out because they're not being exposed, they're not giving opportunities to figure it out what this means for me. What is the point of doing any of these things I'm learning if all that's going to happen is I'm not going to have a place in the world? And so they have this pressure to deliver on college and career when to them it means nothing. It doesn't make a difference if I'm working toward a career that in 10 years when I'm actually at my career, it's not going to be there. Right? Same thing with, we see that in the portrait of a graduate, what are the different characteristics that a student's trying to accomplish at the same time without feeling connected to the work itself. Now, that's the biggest thing when we're looking at the engagement itself. It's not just motivation, it's that connection and feeling an ownership over what their life is going to look like and that it's going to make a sense for them to be doing all these different types of things. So the issue with this is the system is built around students, sure, but it's not necessarily been built with them. And what that means, though, is students don't often have the opportunity to identify what they want to be looking for themselves. They're not making their own decisions. They're not making decisions necessarily in the classes that they want to take, the world that they want to explore. They're not given trust and responsibility in a meaningful way in their day-to-day lives or within the school general system. And that's not meaning to say that students need to be a part of every budgetary discussion that happens at a school. It's not that we need to include students in what the menu is for different restaurants that are happening, or their connection to after school activities. It's not just about them having real decisions in a blind capacity, but it's having real decisions in a way that affects them, that they can see that connection directly. And so they need to manage real resources in some capacity. They need to, whether that's money, whether that's the trust that they have, whether that's connections, they need to be able to control to some degree some sort of a resource in this capacity that allows them to take that ownership, that agency, and move that forward. And then they also need to directly engage with what they're seeing in their communities. Community being defined as locally, as a geographical community is one way to look at it, but community can mean anything. It can mean an identity community. It can mean a broader community of people in the same general sector. Whatever that means, they need to be able to engage directly with the challenges that are happening. Because what winds up happening is that students can see on their phones, they can see on social media, they can see on the news, they can see everywhere, every single day, there's more problems that they could ever solve. And they're being overwhelmed with this every chance that they get, every time they open their phone, every time they talk to someone, every time that there's any sort of an interaction with any other person or thing in the world, it's about what's wrong and what's not going right and what's happening. And they can't make all these changes. There's never going to be a world that they can affect every single change in every single community in every single country of the world that they're being shown. And this is something that's never happened before. Students have never been able to have access to this level of information, to this level of understanding as to how much is really happening in the world, and feeling this lack of ownership over everything that's happening. They can't make a difference. They can't make a change. So why even try? That's what's happening as they develop in the school system. And so it doesn't mean anything to them when they are asked to engage, when they're asked to participate in classes. That doesn't have any weight to it. And so what happens when we change how this system has been structured, though, around them? How do we change that by making the system more with them and include their thoughts, include their ideas, include their process, and includes what's going to be meaningful to them in this path? And so that's where you hear a lot of things about, the hands-on style of activities that students can be doing. That's a big difference. There's a massive difference between even just the style, the structure of a curriculum, having it be purely lecture-based, having it be the power in the hands of the teacher to deliver information and the responsibility of the student to accept that information and learn it. That's not going to be interesting for them. It's not particularly effective in general, no matter what age group you're working with, but especially at high schoolers right now, the system needs to be built with them in a way that can allow them to feel that agency, feel that control, but also have them understand what my role is going to look like in the future in this sector, in this space, in this world. So when I say student agency, I think a lot of people think of it as this is just student voice. We have student government, student council, whatever it is. That's what student agency is. That's not necessarily true. It's not just about having the opportunity to be able to talk or have, an opportunity to publish your thoughts in a school newspaper, or, be interviewed by a local news station or something. It's not just about voice and amplifying it. It's about the responsibility that they have in whatever that means. So the responsibility in their own lives, the responsibility within their own schools, within their futures, within their education. Having some sort of a responsibility is going to allow you to take some sort of ownership over what's happening. And that's where agency really comes from. So it's the decision making that happens, it's the accountability that happens. I've talked to a lot of people that say students aren't, they're lazy, they're not motivated, they're not able to be held accountable. What that means, though, is they might not see accountability the same way that other people do, the way that adults have in the past. Accountability isn't just doing what you're told and following through on that. Accountability to a lot of students, especially in high school right now, is if I make a decision to do something, following through on that. And we have to make sure that everything about that contract of when they sign up to do something is fulfilled. If they say, I would like to do this thing, and then on the other end, it's not provided in the way that is meaningful to them, it's not intentional to be included with them. If it's said that you'll have a voice in the system, you'll have decision-making power in the system, and then they come into the system and it's not that, they're not going to feel accountability toward that system or toward the decisions that they've made up to this point because they weren't their own decisions. They were decisions that were made for them. So what you have to do is we have to make sure that the students, their agency, it's coming from decision-making power and responsibility and giving them enough respect to be able to hold that responsibility and that power. It doesn't mean that it has to be the most power that anyone's ever had in the past. It just has to be meaningful to them on an individual level. So where this comes into play for what we do, it's youth philanthropy. In that way, though, youth philanthropy a lot of the time is just, we give students some amount of money and they take that money and give it somewhere. So that's just a youth grant making program at a very high level. That's not necessarily where every aspect of student agency is going to come into play. It's not just, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about the money itself. It's not just about the fiscal aspects about it. It's about understanding the problems that are happening in the community. It's about listening and connecting to each other. It's about connecting to the community. It's about understanding the way that changes are already being affected. Most students don't know all the different community organizations that are happening in the community that are working every day to affect these types of changes. So getting them out into the community to understand what's happening, to be able to understand what their role could be in those community organizations. These types of things are all the aspects of youth philanthropy. It's getting them involved in systems in a real meaningful way, in a very hands-on way, not just sticking them in the classroom and trying to teach them new things. So when it comes to this, yes, raising, allocating, directing funds to community needs is definitely a form of that, but that's not the only version. A lot of it comes down to learning about their power and their role in the space as well. So this is what this looks like. As we transition from having students purely in a classroom where they're not being engaged, where they're disengaged, but we can't figure out how to get them back. This is what is going to make a difference, is moving that classroom beyond those four walls into the walls of the community and making that impact that they're looking to have, that agency within the community itself. So things like understanding philanthropy, identifying community needs, recognizing their role, giving them the opportunity to engage, reflecting on that community impact that they've had, and then also understanding what this means for the future. A lot of high school students want to make a difference. They want to figure out what their career could be to help people. But if there's not a direct path from that initial thought to what that could look like in the real world, it's not going to mean anything, and they're not going to be able to connect what they want to what they're doing at that point. That's how you get students that are just signing up for courses, signing up for majors, signing up for careers that they don't really care about, and you're not going to see them engaged genuinely at any point in that process because they don't truly care about it, and they haven't been able to be exposed to what it would mean to care about the things that they would like to care about. So what we're looking at, though, is in this model of youth philanthropy, when you give them not just the resources, but the trust, the responsibility to understand what philanthropy is, to understand how to affect changes, to understand these root causes of these issues in the communities, how to address those, how do you go out and give your time, your talents, your treasure to existing organizations, or how do you find new ways, new innovative ways to create projects or opportunities for change within your community. A lot of students, if they want to, you could create your own nonprofit. You could join a nonprofit. You could make your own project that you do on the side for this. You can also just go and support nonprofits in a more volunteering sense. You can support them in a monetary sense. There's all these different areas of what the nonprofit sector looks like, but even broader, the philanthropic sector itself, the idea of giving to others and helping others. That's one of the biggest things that's going to be taken away from this type of an opportunity. And students looking at this from an agency perspective in TPI programming, what we found is that when you put them through this path, when you put them onto this path of the grant making, the fundraising, the strategic volunteerism, all these different pillars of Three Pillars Initiative, what we found is that students participating in these programs, 93% of them felt a sense of agency in life after the program. The national average, though, was 38%. And so what we're able to see is via these small changes. It's not about, again, it's not about directly giving all the students as many resources as possible. So it's not just a cost issue. It's about the opportunity that's given to them. And when you give that to them, they're going to feel engaged. They're going to feel like their engagement means something. And that's where agency comes from. So if you want to have students that have, 97% of them identifying as a part of making civic society happen, 99% of them identifying as engaged community members, that's what we're seeing from our programs. That's what we're seeing the success rates of exactly what we're talking about, that engagement gap, that opportunity to find new ways to engage students, not just in the school work, but in the community itself, in their futures. That's really where we have to tie into to be able to close that gap. As I mentioned, though, the stakes are what drive engagement. So when students feel like it's not going to make a difference, it's not going to make a difference to them. You have to, whether you're teaching math, whether you're teaching history, whether you're teaching English, these have to have some sort of connection to their meaning in life outside of this program, outside of this opportunity. And so the students, when decisions matter, even if they're looking at math, if they understand where this can be applied in their lives, if they understand, if you're talking about calculus even, that's all going to have to come through a perspective of connection and engagement. And if this is something that is going to be difficult to find in other ways of school, this is a really strong opportunity to implement something different, something that has a slightly new model, something that's more innovative as a way to close that gap so that students can feel like, yes, I do have to learn these other topics, but now I understand how these all can be applied to the things that I have an interest in, to making the world the place that I would like to live in. They'll show up differently when the decisions matter. They develop that ownership, and it's not just compliance. Leading with fear, leading by tactics of just, I'm telling you to do this, so you have to do it. That's not going to get engagement. What engagement gets through is, what do I have to do and what are we responsible for? And I don't want anyone to feel like this is something that I can't do that because I don't have the capacity or the resources, the responsibilities, or this isn't something that we're, trying to add on. We already have enough things that we have to measure and deliver on. This falls directly into what every high school is already looking at. Things like portraits of a graduate, understanding that the students that are graduating from high school, they should be strong leaders. They should be able to collaborate with others. They should be able to apply critical thinking to making decisions with real world constraints. This is exactly what this process gives them. The career readiness of careers that are more novel, newer careers that are happening, careers that they know are going to exist in 5, 10 years once they get there. Being in the nonprofit sector, being someone that helps others is always going to exist. So that's not going to go anywhere. Giving them that opportunity to have career readiness with budgeting, evaluations, decision making, that's meaningful, that's impactful, and that's real world applications of these skills that they're learning. Even through civic engagement, where they have real community interactions, when they go out into local organizations and connect with those people, that is what we're trying to deliver in high schools, and it's already difficult to do that. Even just belonging, finding that purpose and identity. This fits perfectly with all of these things that are already there. And it doesn't need to fit around and create a whole new system around it. We can adapt the system that exists currently with a youth philanthropy approach and a model that allows them, the students in these schools, to have that sort of engagement, to have that sort of agency, autonomy in what they're looking for. And that youth philanthropy programming is exactly what's going to give them that type of an understanding of what their world looks like. And again, like I mentioned, the workforce development aspect is a huge aspect. Every high school obviously is going to look at how can we prepare our students for their careers, whatever that might be. But if we're looking at careers that haven't been historically supported very much, one of the largest sectors in the United States is the nonprofit sector. And as I mentioned, that's not a sector that's going to change in the future. And so we should be preparing the students for that sector itself, giving them opportunities to understand, if I want to help people, what does that look like? Well, it's not just that you have to go into finance or engineering or be a doctor. A lot of students are really smart, but they don't feel this connection towards tech or towards these other sectors. And when you give them this opportunity to engage on a person-to-person level, on a people, on a community level, that's where their passion is going to come through. And when you have that passion is what drives engagement. That's when they come to school, they want to learn, they want to know it because they know, I need this skill to be able to do these things that I want to do in my life. Stepping back a little bit from just the students themselves, though, this also creates bridges between the students and the community. But as the students go out into the community, this creates this long-term sustainable aspect of community trust. and community stability. When students go out of their high school, even if they go to a different college, if they grow, if they leave, whatever that might be, they're still going to have this connection to their community if they've been engaged and supported by their community. If they don't feel like that made a difference to them, if they never got engaged in the community, if they never had the support and feeling of agency within that system, it's not going to feel as strong or as relevant for them to go back or to continue to be engaged in that system. So when we're looking at ways to make sure that the students are engaged during and after and throughout the rest of their lives, this is an approach that's going to really be helpful for that type of thing. Now, what I'd mentioned before with the disconnection, that's a big thing as well with this, though. The intergenerational mentorship, when you have students that understand that the adults around them are meant to help them, and not just from a, they say that they're trying to help me, but when they can see it, when it's an adult that shows up every day and listens to them, that's going to make the world of a difference. And that's what's going to allow them to be more connected to each other, to different generations, to different systems within the school. They're going to likely understand, okay, well, if this person was doing this, if this mentor said this and has this responsibility in this relationship with me, now I can understand how to have that same relationship with other teachers, with other, administrators. That process is going to allow that connection to form, and it's going to decrease the polarization that happens between students as they move away, as they feel disconnected, as they find new forms of community and engagement. That's what we want to avoid, is forcing them into, worse versions of what the connections that they could have are going to look like. Now, as I mentioned, what it takes to implement this system, it's not the most difficult thing is not going to be all of the things that need to change. The biggest aspect of starting this is truly just the start of it. It's having a conversation to figure out, what does this look like for us? What are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish? And how can we make this work for us as a school and as a system? So having that first conversation is really what it takes. And after that, we are more than happy to work with any school on an individual level to understand what exactly are your needs, what works best for your school, whether it's a system that maybe it's an after school program that students can come to after school, learn about the ways that they can engage with their community and understand what their meaning and their purpose within their broader community looks like. That's a great place to start, whether it's, students coming in a few times a week during the school day, if they wind up going and visiting local nonprofit organizations, whatever that might be, that's going to be a conversation that it takes place on an individual level, but it does not require a huge change in the system itself before you come to this final conclusion of, now we can do this. The first step is the biggest one, and that's just, let's have a conversation about what it takes and what the goals are, and then we can put you on that path to get there. But it's a small build, it's a path, it's a one step at a time process, and that's what we're really looking for, is to kind of find that engagement, find that process through high schools, and continue to find that engagement style with students. If anyone has any questions, we're more than happy to help, to have conversations about this. Please reach out to TPI, to Three Pillars Initiative. Feel free to send me an email if you just want to have a conversation. Again, you do not have to know the answers to any of these things that we mentioned to be able to start a conversation. It is just, you can just say, here's who I am, here's where I am, and this is where I would like to be, and we'll be happy to talk that through with you. So we appreciate any time that you had, and we'll talk to you soon.